Hello again and welcome to Forum for a Better Understanding. Last week we had a very, very important program on torture. We had a panel of guests from different faiths sharing their own repulsion of torture, their commitment to the abolition of torture on religious grounds. Now today we are taking up the topic, but we're going to look at it through the eyes of a different video clip with a different direction to the program, even if the topic is called Torture Part 2. Our guests today are two of your friends from last week and a friend from many other programs. To my left is the Reverend Steve Ratzliff, who is the pastor of the Mennonite Community Church here in Fresno. In between Steve and Kamal is Sue Kapoor, a retired professor from Fresno State in social work, who is also a disciple of Gandhi, and he'll be sharing with us his own experience and tradition from his own Hindu and other faiths that he has integrated into his personality that find torture totally unthinkable. And directly across from me, Kamal Abu Shamsia, representing the world of Islam by being the executive director of the Islamic Cultural Center in Fresno. So glad that Kamal is here again to speak to the issue, which is so important not only to the Muslim world, but also to the Muslim world. This is an issue that impacts all of us equally in every country and every culture, because torture is a temptation everywhere, and right now it's being practiced in too many places. On that note, I'd like to begin with a clip which comes to us from a DVD called Preventing Torture Everywhere from the National Campaign Against Religious Torture. Stay tuned.
And put in jail.
I was tortured by the Ethiopian government security agents repeatedly, especially in 2005, month of December. I was taken from my workplace.
I was tortured with the electric prod. In Argentina they call it picano. And it's a very, very severe form of torture.
Well, of course, in the house we were beaten up. There were two women with us, and they were molested, taken in another room and molested.
Since the horrors of World War II, the international community has explicitly condemned torture. Torture, like genocide and slavery, is illegal and immoral under all circumstances, without exception.
Torture is defined in international law as the severe infliction of pain by a state agent, pain that can be either physical or psychological, for the purpose of interrogation or punishment.
Torture by the United States against U.S.-held detainees was termed by President Bush and Vice President Cheney as enhanced interrogation techniques. But what it really was torture. And it included the use of waterboarding, which was to make a person believe that they're drowning, and that they would be so desperate that they would then reveal information.
Despite the UN mandate, torture still persists. That's why 50 countries have now ratified the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, or OPCAT, as a mechanism to implement the international ban on torture. Countries that have ratified OPCAT include Great Britain, Germany, France, Australia, Brazil, Ireland, South Africa, and Sweden. Unfortunately, the United States is one of the few major democracies that have not yet agreed to sign OPCAT, and we need to change that.
Because what prisons and jails need is light, and more light. And that's what OPCAT would bring. It would bring in independent outside monitors to take a look at what's going on.
Well, the major purpose is prevention, is not so much reacting to the events of torture that have already happened, but creating systems by which the commission of torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment is prevented from happening in the first place.
OPCAT uses transparency to protect against the use of torture. It does so by requiring each ratifying country to develop its own independent body to oversee its detention facilities to help ensure that cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, including torture, does not occur. Allegations of serious abuse, in some instances amounting to torture, continue to be raised about life in U.S. prisons. Two common practices in particular need urgent attention: the use of long-term solitary confinement and the shackling of pregnant women prisoners during childbirth.
The shackling of pregnant women, prisoners, and girls is pervasive in this country. When a woman is in labor, it is a very common practice to shackle at least one of her legs to the bed, sometimes both legs to the bed, sometimes a hand and a leg. And what happens when a woman is shackled, especially during childbirth, is that she can't really move her body. She can't facilitate the birth of her child.
You know, sometimes on Channel 49 we show things that are very disturbing. Usually we don't. Other stations, they've got it all day long. But that was very disturbing to even think that this is the reality of our world and its legal system. This is what gets done in our name. We talked about this last week. We have to stand up for not being complicit in what's going on. So I'd like to challenge Steve and Sue and Kamal to maybe opt in a little here over their own response to anything we've just seen, maybe one part of it, and eventually we're going to come up with some ideas of what we are going to do to combat it. But let's at least assess it first. Steve, what is the part that you'd like to put in front of us again?
Well, you know, I try to figure out why it is that this kind of thing can really happen in our society. And one of the things that I can think of is that over the past 30 years or so, we've been in kind of a punitive position. We want to solve problems by punishing people, so we send people to prison and we fill our prisons and all kinds of things. So we have this punitive attitude. And so when it comes to a 9/11 and that kind of thing happens, and we get these folks that were supposedly responsible for it, well, we say, well, let's punish them. Let's find out and maybe if we punish them hard enough, we'll get the information that we need. And you know, I do think that whole mindset that we can punish people and that will solve our problems sort of contributes to this whole idea that torture is a punitive kind of measure, but one that will get us what we want if we're persistent and if we use it harshly enough.
Sue, from your experience, even coming from a different part of the world and a different experience coming from India, all that you learned under Gandhi, how do you see this?
Well, it's very unfortunate that while living in 21st century, we still have this very immoral practice on the part of states as well as on the part of some individuals and groups. It is very disturbing to learn and know that it's still going on. That shows that we as human beings have not yet evolved to the heights and elevations where we really should call ourselves real human beings. I come from a faith tradition where the cardinal principle is do not cause sorrow, pain, or suffering to another individual human being. That's the height of it in terms of the non-violent way of treating our other fellow beings. So to me, it's really very disgusting to see that this practice is still going on. Particularly it has come to our attention after this waterboarding actually. That brought a lot of awareness. Though torture was there It's still going on. But somehow this very practice of waterboarding brought that awareness that it is still there. And particularly disturbing is that a civilized nation such as United States is committing that. That's too much for me to take, that how a Christian nation that the people call themselves still practices this kind of a practice or policy that exists there. So from that point of view, it's a very disheartening and too much that this practice goes on. I think we have to work on various levels. It is not only the immoral issue, it is a human rights issue also. Yeah. United Nations has many such articles in its charter. So does the Human Rights Declaration of Human Rights. It has also very clearly stated that it is not at all a practice that we should really practice, and it's a very degrading. And I also believe, like other faiths, that it is a desecration of God, as we are built in the image of God. So when we put or commit this kind of a torture to another human being, we are basically also doing the same thing to God in another form, actually, also. That's how I feel about it.
Where I am too. Kamal, from your perspective, help us get one more point of view here to help us.
Our commitment, aside being faithful servants to our humanity by following the teachings of God, the foundation of Islam is built on not to harm anyone, along the way of no harm to be inflicted or endured. So when we look at the responsibility of establishing peace in the society and peace at home and any noble value that we need to establish, it should not come on the pretext that we can inflict harm of somebody else because we owe their safety and responsibility for our society. Otherwise, it will become the value of an unjust group trying to spread values by taking God-given rights from other people. That cycle needs to be broken, and it requires not just people of faith, it requires all aspects of society to start to address it. And addressing that means we need to take painful steps in recognizing harm, and those who have been tortured in the past, those are victims that their dignity need to be restored, and those who committed those acts needs to be brought to justice. And justice does not mean here committing another act of violence, and that's why as a Muslim I stand also against the death penalty. For having someone taking the life of somebody else, we don't come and take that life of that individual to prevent another crime.
Thank you very much, Kamal. That's about as much as we can do in one half of a program. So stay tuned. In 1 minute, we'll be back for the final half of our program around this issue of preventing torture everywhere. We'll be very concrete, I think, in the second half, laying on some challenges to you as viewers. Stay tuned.
KNXT TV is proud to say thank you to all its viewers who have given their support for over 25 years. And only through your support is KNXT able to provide spiritual and informative programming. Please remember KNXT in your long-term support through wills, bequests, trust, and plan giving. Your gift is important to the future of Catholic television. Help preserve the strength of KNXT's message based on the teachings of Christ. Keep KNXT in your future plans.
Hello and welcome to the second half of our second program on torture, the evils of it, and what we can do as faith-based communities to combat it, to do an alternative way of living, to offer a nonviolent response to violence. What we're going to do is open up this segment with a final clip from the National Religious Coalition Against Torture. The clip is called Preventing Torture Everywhere, and we're going to make that the basis for our discussion in the second half of the show. Stay tuned.
Especially harmful is the use of prolonged solitary confinement, which many studies show can lead to insanity, and which the Council of Europe and the United Nations consider to be a form of torture. The United States alone remains as the only developed country that makes widespread use of solitary confinement.
The closest approximation I could come up with is if you were to lock yourself in your bathroom for days, weeks, months on end, you wouldn't be able to have any conversations with anybody. You wouldn't be able to watch TV. You wouldn't be able to listen to a radio. If you were lucky, you would be able to read a book. And you would stay there 23 hours a day. You might, and I say might, be able to walk outside into another bathroom as your recreation and pace back and forth. And you would do that day in and day out for weeks and months and years. We have people in this country who have been subject to those conditions for decades.
Currently, more than 25,000 prisoners are in solitary confinement in the U.S. By ratifying OPCAT, the United States would be establishing for the first time a national independent mechanism for overseeing the conditions and conduct of U.S. prisons. It would allow us to shed light on our own detention system and help end inhumane practices such as the extreme isolation and the shackling of women during childbirth. We must stop these practices here at home, and we must encourage other countries to end even worse practices abroad. OPCAT is an important way to do that.
The ratification by the United States of the optional protocol, because the United States is already a party to the Convention Against Torture, would have a very, very powerful effect in persuading many other countries to sign and ratify the protocol. Conversely, the decision not to ratify, if it's made public, etc., has the exactly opposite effect, because many countries where the OPCAT is very necessary will say, why should I sign if the United States doesn't sign?
I think that all Americans could probably agree that our government needs to be accountable. It needs to be accountable to us, and it needs to be accountable to its laws. Unfortunately, unless you have someone looking at what happens in these places of detention, it's very easy to hide what you're doing. It's very easy not to practice what you preach.
By bringing transparency to detention facilities worldwide, including here in the United States, OPCAT will dramatically reduce the opportunities for abusive treatment.
Well, I think the U.S. should sign and ratify OPCAT first and foremost to participate in an international enterprise to reduce and eventually abolish torture worldwide. But second, because it would be a recognition that the United States has an unfinished business with regards to treatment of detainees in this country, and that the United States has a lot to learn from the way other democratic societies treat their prison population.
Cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment can only exist behind the walls of secrecy. OPCAT is designed to break through those walls.
There's a role for you here. You can go to our website and sign the statement directed to President Obama asking him to sign the optional protocol on the Convention Against Torture. You can also bring this issue to your congregation and ask them to join you and to join us in urging President Obama to sign the optional protocol. Together, we can end torture forever.
in this last 8 minutes, we really do want to get practical, and that gets hard all the time because we'd all like to just say how awful this is that we have torture and even analyze why, which was very helpful to see that it's part of our coping mechanism. We are punitive people. It just bolsters us up. It keeps us up. But right now I'm going to ask our 3 panelists if they've been able to help me come up with an answer here, and I'll offer mine. What is a concrete thing, a campaign, an issue, something positive that we could be doing personally or in our faith communities to combat torture and to propose that we do sign on to the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, that we join the rest of the democratic world and not hold out like we do at Kyoto and every other agreement that binds us. What are we going to do, Steve, Sue, and Kamal, to be consistently, religiously committed to the end of torture? What can we do?
Well, you know, they gave us a lot of examples here. I mean, you could try to get people to ratify OPCAT, to sign the National Religious Campaign Against Torture statement online. But, you know, I think we also need to learn to give up some things. One thing I think will move us a long ways towards getting rid of this kind of sense that torture is okay, and that is to get rid of hate programs, hate radio, these talk shows that sort of move us to do things that are not positive but are pretty negative. We need to understand that it's not okay to hate or degrade or dehumanize, and those kind of programs tend to sort of push us to do that kind of thing. So we need to sort of recognize that there has to be a change that happens inside each of us, and that we need to understand that besides doing these other things, we need to work at treating each other better, and we need to understand that we don't dehumanize people by degrading who they are and their culture and their race or whatever, or their religion for that matter.
Thank you. Very practical and very real. Sue, what can we do?
Well, first thing is that I already have signed the petition.
Great.
And I would like all the viewers also to sign the petition. I think that's the first thing. As I always say, peace begins with me, so things begin with me. That's number 1. Number 2, no doubt, we have to go to our faith congregations and we have to share this thing and see how many members of our faith can also sign that. But I also would like to say, Steve mentioned about the punitive system that we have. Our criminal system at present is very punitive. We need to move towards a restorative justice system that I think my friend would very much support.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's one of the major contribution of the Mennonite faith like that.
Yeah.
I also would like to see that not only the faith leaders, which I think should provide leadership, but also there should be a broader coalition of other organizations and activists. Particularly I was thinking of the peace activists, because it's a human right issue also at the same time. So we need to bring human rights activists, peace activists, people in the field of nonviolence together. And my ultimate suggestion is that we have to start building what I called a culture of peace and nonviolence.
Yep.
And I organize each year a week of activities at Fresno State, and I also have encouraged the same kind of activities at Pacific University and City College and other education institutions, because we have to start, we have to keep going, keep doing educating, building a culture of peace. Stop the hate, stop the violence, stop the prejudice, and move towards building a culture of peace and nonviolence.
Excellent.
Those are some of the concrete things that I would recommend. Of course, others are, but I'm going to leave to Kamal to take care of.
You didn't leave him much, but 2 minutes, Kamal. Do you have some things that either echo or a fresh thought?
I believe most of the viewers already are ahead of us by addressing this issue of torture. We call it in our homes as bullying. When we have children who are addressing or dominating relationships we don't tolerate as parents, and I know many of the parents are not. What needs to be done is just a public get-together for something like this. If we can manage to do it within one family, we will be able to do that in the school community, in our city, state, and on and on and on. We need to recognize the danger. And the second part that we'd like to bring to the attention is all these efforts of torture tend to dehumanize. So we need to tell the story of that human being who was tortured, to bring that image to home, to be a center of discussion around the dinner table. That person should not be just a number, should be a life story. The impact of torture on their lives, on their children, on their spouse, on their community. We need to give the time and space to tell their story and put a face on the nameless and the faceless.
I want to thank Steve and Sue and Kamal for being here, to Natalie for being here a week ago. And I want to remind you of that website where you can fill out that petition that Sue mentioned, the signing on for agreement that we have OPCAT. Here's how you sign it. nrcat.org/OPCAT. What that means is you're going to the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, and you are opting in for the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. You want to sign it. You can do it online, of course. You could print out the paper when you go to the site, and you can do what we've asked you to. Bring it to your congregations. Bring it to those of your own family cycle, to your own group, and do practical things that will show your commitment to nonviolence. God bless till next week.